I never planned to humiliate my own mother. I just stood there at the entry gate of CFB Halifax with my ID in my hand, watching 26 years of being told I was nothing come undone in about 4 seconds. She's not anyone, Corporal. She's my daughter. She tags along sometimes when I need a ride. My mother said it laughing, the kind of laugh she used at her bridge club when she wanted everyone to know she was the funny one. The young sentry at the gate didn't laugh. He shone his flashlight through the windshield, the beam sliding off my mother's face and landing square on the laminate card I was holding up against the glass. He froze mid-motion, like someone had hit pause on him, then his boots cracked together so hard I felt it through the car door. "Ma'am." His voice came out higher than he probably wanted it to. "Rear-Admiral. I apologize. I didn't realize." My mother let out a short, disbelieving snort. "Don't be ridiculous. She works a desk job at the base. For heaven's sake, swipe us through. We're already late for the remembrance dinner." He wasn't listening to her anymore. He'd already grabbed the radio clipped to his shoulder, and his voice cracked through it loud enough that 2 sentries in the next booth turned their heads. "Gate 2, we have a flag officer on site. Repeat, flag officer on site requesting protocol escort." My mother's hands stayed on the steering wheel like they'd been nailed there. I watched the color leave her face the way water leaves a sink, all at once, with a sound like something draining. But to understand why that moment hit her the way it did, you have to go back, way back, to a kitchen in Dartmouth with avocado green cabinets and a hockey trophy on top of the fridge that wasn't even mine. I'm Nora Calhoun. I'm 41 years old. I hold the rank of Rear Admiral in the Royal Canadian Navy, and for 30 years, my own family thought I answered phones for a living. My father, Walter, repaired transmissions out of a garage off Weiss Road, and the only thing he ever respected was something you could hold and weigh in your hand. Steel, torque specs, a bolt that was either tight or it wasn't. There was no in-between with him, and there was definitely no room in his philosophy for a 10-year-old girl who'd built a working model of a Halifax-class frigate out of solder and scrap aluminum for the regional science fair. I remember carrying that model into the kitchen, careful as if it were full of water, setting it down on the table next to the blue ribbon. First place, out of 41 schools. My father wiped his hands on a rag, looked at it for maybe 2 seconds, and said, "Can't drive it, can't sell it, can't fix a car with it." Then he went back to reading the classifieds for used transmissions. 11 minutes later, my younger brother Patrick came barreling through the screen door holding up a plastic trophy from House League Hockey. Most improved player, third line, hadn't scored a single goal all season, and my mother screamed like he'd won Olympic gold. She put that trophy on top of the fridge, front and center. It stayed there for 9 years. I learned early that I took up too much room when I existed loudly, so I stopped. When I was 16, my father had a heart attack at the shop and didn't make it to the hospital. At the funeral, Patrick, 19, golden-haired captain of absolutely nothing official but somehow always positioned like he was, collapsed into our mother's arms, sobbing in front of the whole congregation at St. Agnes. Aunts rubbed his back. Uncles called him the man of the house now, like that was a job he'd earned through grief volume. I didn't cry in public. I stood behind the funeral director with a legal pad, negotiating down a $1,400 casket rental overcharge, calling the cemetery in Mount Olivet to confirm the plot, working out a payment plan with Sobeys for the lunch platters because our checking account was already thin. That night, I wrote 43 thank you cards by hand and laid them out on the kitchen counter in neat rows so my mother could mail them in the morning. At 6 a.m., she swept all 43 into the recycling bin with one arm to make room for Patrick's hockey gear. "Nobody reads those anyway, Nora. Clear this off." At 18, I came home with a letter from the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, an offer of a fully funded officer training position, paid for through the Department of National Defense subsidized program, contingent on a regional nomination I'd spent 4 months chasing through my Member of Parliament's office, plus a physical fitness standard I'd trained for at 5 every morning along the Dartmouth waterfront in November sleet. I set the letter on the table, the way you'd present something to a superior officer, hands behind my back. My mother was filing her nails. She picked up the envelope like it might be contagious, scanned the first paragraph, and said, "The military? So they'll teach you to type forms in a uniform then." Patrick, sprawled on the couch with a controller welded to his hands, laughed through his nose. No real sound to it, just contempt with breath behind it. I folded that letter in half and zipped it into my backpack so hard the teeth of the zipper bit my thumb. That was the moment I made the decision that would cost me 3 decades. I would make myself small enough that my mother never had to share the light with me. 45 meters under the surface of the Strait of Hormuz, at 3 in the morning, the water presses on you like wet concrete. Visibility was maybe 40 centimeters. The device clamped to the underside of that foreign hull would detonate if it registered vibration past a certain threshold, and my hands were 3 centimeters from the trigger housing. I'd trained my heart rate down to 58 beats a minute, Not from calm, but because calm was the only thing standing between my dive team and becoming debris. I cut the lead wire. Red light went black. I broke the surface and ripped my mask off, and the cold Gulf air tasted like diesel and salt, and there was blood on my lower lip from the pressure differential, cracking the skin. Out there, in explosive ordnance disposal, in the part of the Navy nobody puts on a recruiting poster, I wasn't invisible. I was the only thing standing between a warship and a funeral with 22 folded flags. I hauled myself up over the gunwale, dripping, hands shaking from adrenaline crash, and the comms officer pressed my satellite phone into my glove because we'd finally caught signal. One text from my mother. Patrick needs $9,200 CAD for a deposit on Tesla. His investors need to see he's serious before they sign. E-transfer it tonight. You're at sea anyway. Not like you have anywhere to spend it. No greeting. No how are you. 10 minutes earlier, I'd had my face 18 inches from a device built to kill anything inside a 200-meter radius, and my mother was texting me like she was placing a Tim Hortons order. That was how it started. A hydro bill here, an RRSP emergency there, and it metastasized into something monstrous. My mother dumped $60,000 of her retirement savings into a friend's failed cottage resort scheme in Muskoka. I covered it quietly so she wouldn't lose the house. Patrick rebranded himself as a defense sector consultant. No contract, no clearance, no clients, just a leased office downtown on Bay Street with a view he couldn't afford and a wardrobe that cost more per month than a junior sailor's salary. I bankrolled the entire performance. When his first venture collapsed, I wired $40,000 to keep the creditors off him. When the second one stalled, I covered 8 months of his office lease. His wife, Tasha, redecorated their house twice in 3 years on what I now understand was my hazard pay. Nobody asked how I was. The money just appeared in their accounts the way oxygen appears in a room. Invisible, expected, missed only the moment it stopped. I logged into my banking app once, fingers still salt-crusted from a dive, and watched a balance drop by another chunk. The number wasn't the part that hurt. What hurt was that they cashed every cent of it while sincerely, completely, believing I answered phones in a windowless office in Halifax. The detonator, the real one, the one that finally went off, arrived at Thanksgiving. We don't make as big a production of it here as the Americans do with theirs, but my mother still does the full turkey. And that year, Patrick showed up in a charcoal 3-piece suit he absolutely did not pay for, poured himself wine from the good bottle before anyone sat down, and held court for 40 minutes about strategic acquisitions and his connections inside D&D. Then he raised his glass. Actually, Rear-Admiral Okonkwo called me last week. Wanted my read on a procurement file. Can't say much, classified, but when this contract closes, we're talking 8 figures. He said her name the way you'd mention a neighbor who'd borrowed your snowblower. Casual, familiar. Rear-Admiral Renata Okonkwo reported directly to me. 48 hours earlier, she'd stood at attention in a secure ops room and asked my authorization, in person, to proceed with a mine clearance operation in contested waters. She called me ma'am. She waited for my nod before she moved a single asset. The turkey lodged sideways in my throat. I kept my face still, but something behind my eyes shifted gears entirely. My mother reached across the cranberry sauce and stroked Patrick's forearm the way you'd pet a show dog. Then she turned to me, eyes gone flat, the way they always did when she needed somewhere to put her disappointment. See, Nora, your brother works with admirals, and you're still filing paperwork in some basement. Maybe if you ask nicely, he can get you a janitorial posting at D&D headquarters. Uncle Desmond laughed. Aunt Brielle laughed. Even Tasha covered her smile with her napkin. They laughed at the woman who held the operational authority to deploy or withdraw this country's naval assets in an active theater. I lifted my water glass, never wine, not on a night I needed my faculties, and smiled, small and cold. Yes, Mother, Patrick has very impressive connections. I filed every word of that dinner into a mental dossier I'd been quietly building for 3 years. The thing that finally cracked the case open arrived a few months later, in an envelope with the Department of National Defense crest embossed on the corner, sitting half-buried in coffee grounds in my mother's kitchen trash. My personnel file still listed her Dartmouth address as next of kin from when I was 18 and hadn't thought to change it. I pulled it out, brushed the grounds off the gold lettering. Rear-Admiral Nora Calhoun. An invitation, guest of honor and keynote speaker, to the National Naval Symposium Gala in Ottawa, flag officers from across the country, allied attachés, the single biggest event in the EOD community in North America. My mother snatched it out of my hand before I'd even finished reading it. I threw that out for a reason. It's a scam. They print fake military titles on the envelope to fool gullible people. You answer phones, Nora. What on earth would you be getting an invitation addressed to an admiral for? She tossed it toward the bin. It missed, landed face up on the linoleum, the words Rear-Admiral staring at the ceiling. 30 years of armor cracked straight down the middle. What happened next made it worse. She'd already maneuvered a guest pass for herself through a woman in her curling league, whose husband was a retired colonel, and announced that she and Patrick would be coming too, so he could network with defense contractors. Then she pointed a manicured finger at me. You'll wear something plain and dark. You'll carry my coat. You walk 3 steps behind me, and you do not speak unless spoken to. I will not have you embarrassing me in front of generals. The night of the gala, I didn't wear my uniform. I pulled my hair into a regulation bun tight enough to give me a headache by hour 6, put on a plain navy dress, and slid my Department of National Defense identification, the one with the gold flag officer seal on it, into the bottom of my handbag, where she'd never think to look. I climbed into the passenger seat of her Buick. Her drugstore perfume filled the whole cabin like a small chemical event. Patrick sprawled in the back, laughing at something on his phone. Tonight, I decided I would not steer. I would let her pilot her own ship full speed into a reef she couldn't see coming. 5 o'clock. The car rolled up to the checkpoint outside the convention center, where base security ran the perimeter for the event. My mother thrust her phone at the windshield, waving her guest pass, rattling off the names of colonels she'd Googled on the drive over. The young sentry couldn't have been more than 6 months out of basic, wasn't impressed by any of it. He leaned down and put his flashlight through the passenger window, standard procedure, checking every occupant. That's when she said it. She's not anyone, Corporal. She tags along sometimes. Swipe us through. I held my ID up to the glass. The rest you already know. My mother laughed that high, disbelieving laugh and leaned across me toward the booth. Stand down, soldier. You've made a mistake. She's my daughter, a clerk. There's been a mix-up with the card. The booth door opened a second time, and Master Warrant Officer Holloway stepped out under the floodlights. The man I'd personally dragged across 40 meters of burning rubble outside Kandahar in 2009, shrapnel in my own forearm the whole way, who'd sworn on a stretcher that he'd make sure anyone who ever served with him knew exactly who I was. His face split into a grin like sunrise on a flight deck. He marched up, 6 feet out, and delivered a salute sharp enough to put on a recruiting poster. Admiral Calhoun, ma'am. Absolute honor. The room's been waiting on our guest of honor all evening. We've got an escort standing by. The air in that car turned to glass. My mother's knuckles went white on the wheel. In the back seat, Patrick made a sound I'd never heard a grown man make before, something between a cough and a question with no words in it. I said, low and even, the voice I use when I'm telling a fleet whether or not people live tonight. At ease, Master Warrant Officer. Good to see you're still standing. Then I opened my own door, stepped out onto the pavement, straightened my dress, and looked back through the window at the 2 people who'd called me invisible for 30 years. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked through the checkpoint into the hall. If you've ever swallowed your pride to keep a fake peace with people who never once asked what it cost you, you already know what's coming next, because what I delivered after that night is going to feel like it was written for you too. Inside, the room rose. 1,000 officers in mess dress stood as one, chairs scraping marble like a wave breaking. The chief of the defense staff crossed the floor and took both my hands. Nora. We've been looking forward to this all year. I climbed to the podium, and behind me a screen lit up with my service photo 20 feet tall and the words Guest of Honor, Rear-Admiral Nora Calhoun, EOD. My mother and Patrick were seated at a table near the kitchen doors, the only 2 name cards on the whole floor written in rushed, last-minute handwriting because they'd barely made the guest list. Her mascara was already running. Patrick's borrowed money suit looked cheap under those chandeliers, surrounded by the real defense professionals he'd spent 2 years impersonating, not one of whom knew his name or cared to learn it. I gave my address. I talked about the people who clear a path through the dark so everyone else can walk through it in daylight without ever knowing it was there. I talked about service that asks for no applause. Then I found my mother's table with my eyes and dropped my voice half an octave. Being unseen isn't a tragedy, it's the job. As long as it's a choice you made, not one that was made for you by the people who should have looked first. She stared at the tablecloth for the rest of the night. Patrick didn't move. Afterward, Renata, the real one, my own protégé, the woman my brother had been borrowing as a prop, caught me in the corridor with her arms crossed. You let your own mother drive the guest of honor to the door like a chauffeur service and call you nobody in front of your own people. I watched you disarm a daisy chain device in a sandstorm without your hand shaking once, Nora. 1 sentence from her, and you fold like a recruit on day 1. How much more are you going to hand a family that uses you as a cash machine and spits on the receipt? It landed like a flashbang. All light, all at once, nowhere to look away to. I took a government car home alone that night. Black plates, cold leather seats, the city sliding by in silence. Somewhere around the McKay Bridge, I opened my banking app and did, calmly, methodically, the most violent thing I have ever done to another human being without raising my voice. I canceled every automatic transfer, the hydro top-up, the quarterly wire to Patrick's office lease, the annual lump sum that had been quietly covering his Tesla insurance for 2 years. 11 transactions, 11 severed lines. I typed 1 email, no preamble, addressed to both of them. I will never again be the thing this family stands on. All financial support ends tonight at midnight. This isn't a negotiation. I attached my unclassified service record. 3 deployments, 16 successful high-risk neutralizations, a Star of Military Valor citation. Within the hour, the chain reactions started. My mother's credit card declined at the keg in front of her entire curling league. Patrick's investors ran an actual background check for the first time in 2 years and found no clearance, no contract, no consulting history of any kind. Just a sister he'd been telling people was a low-level clerk, quietly bankrolling every inch of his act. His wife Tasha called me sobbing. "Nora, please, his deal is falling apart. Tell them it's a misunderstanding." "There's nothing to fix, Tasha. They're stating facts." I hung up. Their entire performance, financed by my hazard pay, decorated with stolen credibility, was over. A week later, my mother walked into my office in Halifax without an appointment, passed my aide, passed 2 checkpoints, mascara dried on both cheeks, a script she'd clearly rehearsed in the car. No apology for the gate. No mention of 30 years of anything. Just guilt, deployed like the only weapon she'd ever owned. One bad night and you throw away your family. Your father would be ashamed of you for humiliating me like that. She held her phone up, a text thread from Patrick. "He hasn't eaten in 3 days. Tasha's threatening to leave. Are you satisfied? Is this what 20 years of service taught you? How to destroy the people who raised you?" I let the silence stretch until her rehearsed sobs stuttered out on their own. Then I stood, opened my secure cabinet, and set a single document on the glass desk between us. The Star of Military Valor citation. Her hands shook reading it. "Entered mine-laden waters under direct hostile fire to locate and neutralize multiple explosive devices, directly preserving the lives of 14 service members." "You're not crying because I hurt you," I said. "You're crying because you got caught." She folded into the chair and wept. Not the performance crying she'd used as currency for 30 years, but the airless kind, the kind that happens when you find out the floor under your whole life was made of cardboard. A month after that, she called and asked me to come to the old house, just once, just to see something. The kitchen smelled like dust and cold coffee. On the table sat my father's toolbox, dragged out from the back of a closet it had been sealed in since he died, a 1/4 inch of grime on the lid. Nobody had touched it in 23 years. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in an oil-stained shop rag that still smelled faintly of WD-40, were 2 things. A newspaper clipping, brittle and yellowed, from the Chronicle Herald, a small photo of a young woman in dress whites, the headline "Local Woman Commissioned as Naval Officer." He'd kept it. Underneath, laminated carefully, edges trimmed straight, was my old science fair certificate, the one he'd glanced at for 2 seconds and called useless. And under that, a piece of scrap steel about 3 inches long, bent and hammered into the rough shape of an anchor, with 5 words etched into it in shaky welding torch letters: "Anchor of my life, my daughter." My mother's voice broke on every other word. "I found this 3 weeks ago, going through the closet, the banks after the house. I was looking for tools to sell." She pressed her palm flat against the table. "He never told me. He let me think he didn't care about you either. My father, the man who only respected what he could grip in his hand, had seen exactly what I was, from the very first day, and hidden that recognition in the most private place he owned because tenderness wasn't a language his hands knew how to speak." My mother looked up, eyes nearly swollen shut. "Nora, why did you let me do that to you? Why did you let me treat you like you were nothing?" Something in my chest, sealed off for 30 years like a flooding compartment on a sinking ship, finally gave way. "Because I took Dad's rule and applied it to the wrong war," I said. "I made myself small so you and Patrick would have all the room. I taught you how to dismiss me. Nobody forced you to learn it, but I handed you the textbook." There was no accusation in it. Just 2 people looking at the same wreckage at the same time, finally agreeing on what it was. At the family reunion that summer, the living room wall in my mother's house, the one that had carried Patrick's House League ribbons and that plastic hockey trophy for 23 years, stood completely bare, every nail hole patched and painted over. Patrick stood on a dining chair with a level in one hand and a hammer in the other, his fingers actually shaking, and hung my framed commissioning photo and the Star of Military Valor citation dead center. Beside it, one more nail, thick and industrial, the kind our father would have used, and on it, the small welded anchor. Every relative who'd laughed at that Thanksgiving table watched in total silence. Nobody made a joke. Patrick stepped down, set the hammer on the table without a word, and for the entire dinner, didn't say one self-promoting sentence. The man who used to tell rooms full of relatives that admirals called him for advice had finally run out of material. Before we ate, my mother stood, gripping the table edge to steady herself. "This is my daughter," she said, loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "A Rear-Admiral in the Royal Canadian Navy. A woman who went into minefields with her bare hands to bring other people's children home safe. For 30 years I made her invisible and told her she was nothing, and I was wrong. Tonight I'm asking her to step into the light and I'm asking every one of you to see her the way I should have seen her from the very beginning. It took 30 years to dig that hole and 30 seconds to fill it. I stood alone in front of the mirror in my quarters a few nights later, running my thumb along the star on my shoulder board, and understood the most expensive lesson of a 30-year career had nothing to do with ordnance, or strategy, or command. People salute you because of rank. They follow orders because regulations say they have to. But being truly seen only happens when the people who claim to love you choose, deliberately, painfully, to put down their own selfishness and actually look at who you are. Pride doesn't come from how much you can endure in silence. It's born the moment you stop protecting someone else's comfortable lie and start defending your own truth. Unconditional sacrifice doesn't always earn you love. Sometimes it just teaches the people around you that your generosity is theirs to spend, and your silence is permission. That was the price of my lesson, paid in decades of swallowed pride and nights spent disarming things that wanted to kill me, so I could wire the money home to people who didn't know my rank, didn't know my name was on a citation for valor, and never once thought to ask.